it gives me great pleasure to introduce our panelists in alphabetical order. So first we have Sohrab Ahmari, the founder and editor of Compact Magazine and a contributing writer for The New Statesman. Prior to that, he spent a decade at News Corp as an editor and columnist with the Wall Street Journal opinion pages in New York and London, and as the op-ed editor of the New York Post. His books include The Unbroken Thread, 2021, and Tyranny, Inc., 2023, both published by Penguin Random House. Jennie Murray is president and CEO of the National Immigration Forum. Formed by her experiences in an immigrant family throughout her career, she has committed herself to ensuring the U.S. has a well-functioning immigration system that is secure, offers protection to those fleeing violence, drives a thriving economy, and attracts innovation for global competitiveness. She has created unique programs that connect American employers with newcomer workers that help them integrate. In addition, she was instrumental in helping Afghan evacuees arriving to the U.S. and assisted in the resettlement of displaced Ukrainian women in Poland at the beginning of the Russian-Ukrainian War. Gaby Pacheco is an influential immigrant rights and education leader who serves as president and CEO of the Dream.us. As an immigrant herself, Pacheco has an intimate understanding of the challenges surrounding immigration to the United States. She has played a pivotal role in advocating for immigration and immigrant rights, including co-leading a 4-month walk from Miami to DC, known as the Trail of Dreams, in 2010, and testifying before Congress in 2013. And last but not least, Jim Robb is Vice President for Alliances at Numbers USA. With the Immigration Reform Organization since its founding in 1996, he has served in several roles. Numbers USA believes that better immigration is possible and needed. Robb plays a significant role in the organization's efforts to empower grassroots supporters to achieve sensible immigration policy. He is the author of Political Migrants, Hispanic Voters on the Move. Before we start, I would like to invite a member of our team to read The Braver Angel's Way. Can I invite one of our team members to unmute and go ahead with that? Thank you, Natalie.
We state our views freely and fully without fear. We treat people who disagree with us with honesty, dignity, and respect. We welcome opportunities to engage those with whom we disagree. We believe all of us have blind spots and none of us are not worth talking to. We seek to disagree accurately, avoiding exaggeration and stereotypes. We look for common ground where it exists, and, if possible, find ways to work together. We believe that in disagreements, both sides share and learn. In Braver Angels, neither side is teaching the other or giving feedback on how to think or say things differently. And that, Madam Chair, is the Braver Angels way.
Thank you, Natalie. And with that, I call this debate to order. The resolution on the table today is resolved, expand legal immigration. Resolved, expand legal immigration. Our first speaker will be Gaby Pacheco. Gaby, you have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. Good afternoon, everyone. I stand before you not just as a supporter of immigration, but as someone whose life has been shaped by it. I came to this country when I was 8 years old from Guayaquil, Ecuador, with my family. We arrived in Miami with dreams and an unshakable belief in the American promise, that through hard work, we could build a better life. My story is not unique. It's part of the millions of immigrants who contribute to the strength and diversity of this nation and the millions of immigrants that have come before us. We lived in Miami in a very close-knit, diverse community. Our neighbors were Black, Nicaraguan, Haitian, Puerto Rican, and Cuban, and we were united by the pursuit of the American dream. My siblings and I worked hard, but it wasn't easy. As a child, I felt no different than my friends who were born here and were citizens. But I heard my parents once in a while have conversations and get on the phone with their attorney, or I would hear my sister translating to immigration services. And despite all this, and my parents paying legal support and having an attorney and trying to navigate a very complex system, they actually were not able to get a legal status until 3 months ago, 31 years later. Though I grew up kind of not really understanding, I had a desire to be a college graduate and contribute to my community as a teacher. And though I excelled academically, I couldn't access any scholarships I had earned or be eligible for federal aid due to my immigration status. So even though my parents paid taxes and we were contributors, none of that was available to me. I still persevered. I graduated with a degree in special education, but I couldn't legally work as a teacher. So in 2010, I walked 1,500 miles from Miami to Washington, D.C. to advocate for immigration reform. And along the way, I met Americans who, once they heard our stories, they changed their minds about immigration. They realized that immigrants were being scapegoated for the country's economic issues and the lack of leadership in fixing our broken immigration system. Now, let's talk about the numbers. Immigrants are integral to the U.S. economy. In 2021 alone, immigrants contributed over $492 billion in federal, state, and local taxes. Undocumented immigrants pay billions too, an estimated $11.7 billion in state and local taxes. Immigrants support industries from, and we know it, right, agriculture, but also to health. And many of the foods we eat, the roads we drive on, and the innovations that define our future are built on immigrant labor. Beyond economics, though, immigrants enrich our culture and fabric of America. We bring new ideas, perspective, and language, but this diversity strengthens us. It doesn't dilute our American identity, it deepens it. Today, I'm speaking to you in English, but I also speak other languages, something that is very common worldwide. The music, food, and technology you rely on often have immigrants' roots. Some worry about immigrants taking jobs or threaten to public safety, but facts don't support these fears. Studies show immigrants complement the native workforce. They create jobs, increase economic growth, and companies like Google, Tesla, and Uber were founded here by immigrants in the United States. And immigrants are statistically less likely to commit crimes than native-born citizens. What we need is a legal immigration system that allows people to contribute fully and help both our economy and our country grow. So today, I ask you to consider the real human stories behind the policy debate, as I am one of the living proof of what immigration does for this country. I was able to get a legal status when DACA happened in 2012. I got a good job. I was able to get healthcare. I was able to buy my first home. And I have benefited from this nation's opportunity. And in turn, I have dedicated my life to ensuring others have the same chance and opportunity to contribute. America's future depends on welcoming immigrants, not as outsiders, but as vital contributors along the native-born. So I just want to end by saying that immigration isn't just good for America. It's essential to its identity. It is how we stay innovative, resilient, and most importantly, true to our founding values. America is a nation of immigrants, and we know how good immigrants have been to this nation. We now just need to ensure that we reform our broken immigration system. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gaby. And for our first question, we will go to Nancy Evans. Nancy, could you please unmute and address your question to me? We'll wait just for a moment. It takes a little time sometimes.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can, Nancy. Go for it.
Thank you. So, Madam Chair, my question concerns the bipartisan bill, the border bill that was in recent legislation that did not pass. And my question was what the panel views as the strengths the bill had and what were the weaknesses that the bill presented and what might have been done to make it better. Thank you.
This question is for the previous speaker. So the floor is yours, Gaby.
Sure. Thank you so much for that question, Madam Chair. And what I first want to say is that with that particular bill and with everything, the dialogue that we have on immigration, the border is often the focal point of concern. But we need to approach it with solutions that are both effective and humane. securing our borders doesn't have to mean building a wall or using outdated methods. In fact, today we have technology that offers us much better ways to secure our border while protecting the environment and respecting the border communities that live along the border. So we can use drones and sensors and other smart technologies to monitor large areas in real time without disrupting, for example, local wildlife in our ecosystem. I think one of the things that the border bills focus on too much is throwing money at the problem without actually looking at and realizing that our immigration system is outdated and it's broken. We need to ensure that those individuals who are here in the United States that have been here for decades, like my parents, also have a chance and an opportunity to be able to regularize their status. And also, when we look at the, for example, asylum system, we know that our asylum system is broken. We need to ensure that people are able to get a result or be able to have their decision by a judge made way quicker than what we are seeing. I believe that what is happening too is that we're looking at our immigration system only just as the US, but reality is that you have countries that are just south of us, like Nicaragua, Cuba, Haiti, that have real issues and problems. And us putting a wall, it's not going to stop people from coming here. We need to think about this as a holistic approach. And also we need to think about this as a thing that we have to constantly be looking at. One bill, 1 year is not going to solve all of our problems that we have on immigration. We need an system similar to Canada that reviews what its needs are of the country and of the immigrants year to year.
Thank you to our speaker. Our next questioner will be Stephen Buckley. Stephen, please unmute and ask your question of the speaker to me. I also would like, as we wait for Stephen, I want to remind everyone that the raise hand feature in Zoom isn't going to get you anywhere. Remember to use the link in the chat. So, all right. Would our questioner please unmute and go forward?
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. Yes, my question is it possible to expand immigration by too much? And if so, shouldn't we be discussing about what amount is just right instead of whether all expansion is good?
Thank you to our questioner, to our speaker.
Madam Chair, that actually is a great segue into what I was just saying before. And of course, it's understandable that cities can feel strained when there is an influx of people, just in large populous cities do when people move in. And one of the things I always hear when we talk about immigration is this thing of we can't take in the whole entire world. And that's the truth, right? We have to have sensible immigration laws. But one of the things that we have to make sure is that we look at and see what are the needs of our communities. We know, for example, that New York City, Boston, Chicago have had strains when you have seen immigrants come in, being bussed in without them really wanting to from the Texas and Florida states. But there is states like in Utah, we have seen many of our states within the middle of the country that actually have benefited and want immigrants. And so I think that for us, right, we need to look at it as what is both the humane component of it, but also the economic component to it of immigrants and what they bring to our cities, our nation, our country. We have right now, the birth rate is 1.6. What's going to happen, right? We see other countries across the world that are paying and saying to immigrants, we will give you $35,000. We'll give you $50,000 for you to move into our country to help. And so I think that for us, that the solution is that for places where there's needs of teachers and nurses and agricultural workers, right? Those are vital to our U.S. economy, that we look into that and try to figure out how to critically close those workforce gaps with immigration and immigrants. So here's where I think, as I was saying before, Canada, for example, has done a good job in saying every year, right? All right, how many immigrants do we need in this particular workforce area? And we have an orderly way to ensure that individuals who want to stay here can stay here. Other people simply want to come, work, and then go back home. And we should be able to have a system that works for both of them, but also for this country.
Thank you to our questioner and our speaker. And our final questioner for this panelist will be Bill Woodson. Bill, please go ahead, unmute, and direct your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And as a former college administrator, I was aware of the Dream.us, and I think it's an exciting opportunity. I was curious to know how many college students has the Dream.us been able to support so far? And has there ever been like an estimate of how many young people the Dream.us would be able to benefit from with some financial support that is currently not available to them because of federal and state regulations?
Thank you so much for that question. And Madam Chair, the Dream.us helps just a small portion of individuals who graduate from high school every year who are categorized as dreamers. So it's estimated by the Migration Policy Institute that there are about 98,000 dreamers. So these are individuals who came to the US as children. The average age of the scholars that we help at the Dream.us came at the age of 4. And so they have done their elementary, middle, and high school schooling here in the United States. They feel they're Americans. Some of them don't even know that they weren't even born here. And right now, there is estimated there's about 400,000 immigrants who are in a precarious immigration status. They either have DACA, TPS, have some sort of asylum, or are fully undocumented in college. The Dream.us helps about 1,100 a year. We provide scholarships for them to be able to go to school. The good news is that unlike when I graduated high school in 2003 in the state of Florida, where I was pushed to pay as an international student. Today, there are 25 states, so half of the country provides in-state tuition. The first one ever that passed that law was in 2001 by the state of Texas, followed by California. And there's actually 18 states plus Washington, D.C. that provide state aid. So access to education has become a little bit easier for immigrants who are graduating from college. And what we are seeing is that they are graduating in great numbers. The Dream.us has 2 scholarships, the national scholarship that just helps with in-state tuition or for the tuition and fees. And that is, our graduation rate is at 76%. The other scholarship, the Opportunity Scholarship, where we help students that live in states like Georgia that banned undocumented students from going to college, even if they want to pay out-of-state tuition or international student fees, that one has an 85% graduation rate. So what we're seeing is that they are succeeding, they are moving on, and that our alumni 6 months after graduating are making more money than their parents combined. So big pool of people, but they're driven, talented, and they are hoping and wanting an opportunity to fully be integrated and belong in this country that is their home.
Thank you to all of our questioners and to the speaker. Jazz hands, how we clap here in online debates. So thank you to our speaker and questioners. Now we will move on to our first speaker in the negative, will be Jim Robb. Jim, the floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Braver Angels members and Braver Angels and fellow panelists. The immigration issue is extremely complicated and has so many facets, but today we're just discussing one facet, but a really important one. What should the level of legal immigration be? Should that level be increased? And I say no for 5 reasons, which I will give you now. The first reason is that current immigration from all sources is already really gigantic. The U.S. has currently 51 million foreign-born persons, and that's 15.6% of the population. These numbers are hot off the press from the government. 15.6% is higher than the percentage of immigration in all our history even including the 1700s. You'd have to go back to the 1600s before it would be higher than that. So we've got a lot. And this has increased by 5 million just in 2 years. Now, much of that has been illegal immigration. So this is immigration by all sources, but it's been rapidly increasing under this administration. These numbers, by the way, are from the current population survey of the Census Bureau. When you say legal immigration should be increased, you have to consider that illegal immigration is really large right now, and legal immigration is currently a minority of all immigration. We hope this changes soon, but that's the way it is now. So first point is we already have a lot of immigration. Second point, over the last 2 years, more than 3/4 of net new employment went to foreign-born persons. Now that might be okay if all Americans were adequately employed, but instead the percentage of American-born men, say for one, to take one group, of American-born men of working age actually working is in steep long-term decline. Of high school educated men of working age, 32% currently do not hold a job. This level has tripled over the last several decades. So we have a problem of chronic underemployment. And so that's a second reason. The third reason is the wages earned by the bottom half of US workers have been totally flat after adjusting for inflation for about 60 years. Now, virtually all the rewards in terms of greater income and in the economy have gone to the college educated and highly educated or highly paid professionals over the last decades. Their pay has skyrocketed. There are many reasons for stagnant pay: technology, decline of manufacturing, decline of labor unions. But one huge reason is too much labor chasing too few jobs. And so, of course, if you have too much of something, the price goes down. And that's one reason why wages have been flat and why workers are constantly saying on surveys they're unhappy with the economy. They're just not keeping up. The fourth reason is America is hardly an empty country. We have 334 million people here right now, and that's the third largest population in the world after India and China. And we also have a housing shortage of several million units. That was true when the current president came into office, and it's just gotten much worse because of the immigration has been so rapid. And also, homelessness has been growing rapidly because of a housing shortage, the price of housing being so far out of reach. And now we even have a good number of people working at jobs, and yet they're on the street because the shelters are filled and they can't afford apartments. So if we continue growing at the rate we're growing and bringing in people at the rate we're bringing them in, let alone increasing it, the housing shortage is just going to get worse. And because of these reasons I've listed, the fifth reason is Americans really want decreased immigration, not increases. The Gallup poll has asked the same question about immigration levels for half a century. It simply asks people if they want the number of legal immigrants to go up in number, go down in number, or stay the same. This year, and the poll just dropped about a month ago, this year, 55% of Americans said that immigration levels should be decreased, 25% wanted to keep it at the same level, and only 16% wanted immigration to increase. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. For our first question, we will go to Michael Smith. Michael, please unmute and ask your question to me. I'm sorry, Michael Abramson. Pardon me.
Michael, go ahead. You're unmuted.
Well, okay. Michael, giving him just a moment. All right, let's go on to Andrew Smith. We had mixed up those names there, but Andrew Smith, are you available to ask your question?
Yes, I'm available, Madam Chair.
Right. The floor is
So,
yours.
Madam Chair, my question is, a declining and aging population erodes property values and reduces tax revenue per capita. It leads to labor shortages and a shortfall in Social Security funding. How will we address these problems if we don't expand legal immigration? Thank you.
Thank you to our questioner. To our speaker.
Right. So, but thank you for the question. The population isn't declining in the US, it's rapidly growing. And in my lifetime, it is almost doubled. And the Census Bureau projects the future population of the US all the way out to the end of this century. And in the using the current immigration level, the number continues to of Americans continues to increase for decades and decades. So it would be true that we would be declining because of our birth rate if we didn't have immigration. Nobody's calling for no immigration. So, but the current number is more than adequate to keep up population levels.
Thank you very much to our speaker. Next, we will go to Sherry Gravely. Sherry, please unmute and direct your question to me.
Oh, can you hear me? Yes.
Yes,
Hi.
I can.
So, Jim, I know people do conflate so often legal and illegal immigration, which I find disingenuous. But if we could control our illegal immigration, would you and people that
Sherry, address your question to me, please.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Mm-hmm.
Madam Chair, I'm so sorry. So, Jim, I know people constantly conflate legal and illegal immigration, which I don't think is genuine, but if we could control, maybe even stop most of the illegal immigration, Madam Chair, would the speaker consider increasing certain kinds of legal immigration?
Thank you to our questioner. To the speaker.
Thank you for the question. Certain kinds, that question implies that we might perhaps increase some categories and decrease others. So that's all open for discussion. I think overall immigration levels should not increase and perhaps should go down somewhat because of the housing shortage we have, because of the flat wages of Americans in the bottom half of the economy, and other issues. I think our immigration, even at somewhat reduced levels, would be is pushing at our infrastructure and giving us some strain.
Thank you very much. And now for our final question for the speaker, we will go to Richard Kensky. Richard, please unmute.
Yes.
Yep.
I finally figured out how to unmute. Madam Chair, please ask the previous speaker, even if he could put a moratorium on further immigration, how does he feel that will affect the flood of refugees seeking asylum in our country at our border, which is definitely the bigger problem, and how he would handle that?
Thank you for the question. To our speaker.
We're not calling, at my organization, Numbers USA, we're not calling for a moratorium on legal immigration. So I have to leave that to one side. In terms of how to handle the floods of people seeking refuge, asylum, in a more orderly way, certainly, many steps can be taken. The international agreements that are the basis of the asylum system are 50 years out of date, and they were really set to answer the crisis of refugees that happened prior to and after the Second World War. So we're in modern times, we've got modern problems, And we've got people are so much more able to go from country to country. And then when they successfully cross a boundary, they can put a social media post and say, hey, I made it. Here's how you do it. And so now, instead of people trickling in, we do have these floods. So every country in the every advanced economic country in the world has a problem with the asylum system being jammed up, with it being gamed by people who really are economic migrants. And we will have to address probably at the level of international agreements, but also the Congress can tighten up requirements and many other things that should be done to address the issue. But it is a different issue than legal immigration, which is our subject for today.
Thank you to our speaker and to our questioners. We'll now go on to our second speaker in the affirmative, our third overall speaker, Jennie Murray. The floor is yours. You have 5 minutes.
Thank you so much. I'm so happy to be with you all today. The Great American Experiment, as I like to call it, has been activated for the last 250 years. And there is no way we would have this exceptional history, be the global leader we are, the driver of innovation we are, or a leading economy without a robust immigration system. Expanded, well-managed, orderly legal immigration will continue to be essential to America's success, just as it has been for all of our history. So let's get to some numbers. We've heard numbers today. Baby boomers are retiring at a rapid rate, thousands per day. We need more workers to save and create American jobs. And I don't know about you, but I'm raising an 8-year-old, and he won't be ready for the American workforce for another 10 years. Our birth rate is at an all-time low, and we will need workers who can take these jobs and create these jobs. But we're not talking about an unlimited number here. You know, we've actually put a formula together at the forum, and so have many center-right think tanks who are pro adding foreign workers to the workforce. Much of immigration is necessary to combat and overcome our demographic challenges, and we have many. We looked at the data and found that right now, just to keep up with the rapidly retiring baby boomer rate, we need 37% more workers today. Now, let's talk about why. We have a record low birth rate. Our unemployment rate is very low, and we have many people not participating in the workforce, and we'll talk about that in a minute. We have labor shortages that are choking off American businesses and causing industry to flail. We have 8 to 10 million open jobs, 8 to 10 million open jobs per month, but they're mostly mid-skilled. So while we heard it said earlier that this might be due to immigration, it's actually due to education. We need to make sure American workers are educated to be able to fill the jobs that we have open, that we're in need of filling. They are mid-skill, and there's 8 to 10 million per month. Immigration is not the reason why these jobs are not being filled. And in fact, having more workers in the system who actually fall into the mid-skill range would help us tremendously. And last year, there was an incredible article by Politico, and there have been many, Washington Post, on and on and on, that have shown that, in particular, our economy post-COVID has only grown in a few key ways. One of the main ways that it's grown in our worker, with the numbers that are attributed to the workers contributing to the system and gaining economic growth, is the infusion of workers specifically from 6 countries: Ukraine, Afghanistan, Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela. So these are the paroled folks who have been given legal temporary status to be able to come to the U.S. because of various wars and other incredible concerns in home country. They've been given temporary work permits, and they have in fact saved us economically over the last few years as we've built back strong post-COVID. Fed Chairman Powell himself, 11 times, I tend to be a Powell fan, I've counted 11 times since October of 2022, has said that adding workers to the system through legal immigration is the only way that we can truly combat inflation. He said he can continue to change the rates. He can work on his side of the supply and demand equation, but we must fill the other side of it with workers who can truly help combat inflation. And just a note on that, Fed chairmen usually don't speak about any type of policy in particular as a solution. They're very sort of agnostic about that. And then I'd love to just take a few glimpses here on the story quickly. You heard that I was in Poland just after the war. Let me tell you what I saw other than brave, wonderful women there. I saw Canada recruiting these skilled, incredible workers. And the ambassador told me 1 in 7 Manitobans is now Ukrainian or Afghan post 2021, and their economy is soaring. Legal immigration channels help reduce issues that we spoke about early, such as illegal crossings, by having more alternative pathways. And so we need to look at our economy and the ways to solve our current immigration problems with more legal immigration. Thank you, Madam Chair. Happy to be a part of this conversation.
Thank you to our speaker. We will now go to questions for the speaker. Carol Van Bruggen. Carol, please unmute and ask your question to me.
Can you hear me?
We sure can.
Okay, thank you, Madam Chair. My question for the speaker is why they think the real reason that the bipartisan bill just recently voted down by Congress was and worked on by both conservatives and liberals, what was either wrong with it or good about it. And from the speaker's perspective, could it not be at least a start and a better solutions than what we have, or the speaker's thought on that would be wonderful.
Thank you for the question. To our speaker.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Absolutely. And I think that the question is referring to the Senate bill that Lankford, Sinema, and Murphy put into place. So if the Border Act bill is the one we're speaking about, yes, absolutely. The Border Act bill would have solved many of the issues, but as spoken about earlier, it tackles several issues. It tackles both unauthorized immigration and the legal pathways, right? It would have been a very good first step in looking at our current situation, providing an orderly, safe, and humane border process, and looking to edit the asylum system. However, definitely we have to maintain an asylum system, and that bill would have done that. It might have been too narrow for some people's taste, but we need to make sure that we still, as we have been throughout our nation's history, been the people shining the light on the hill for those that are the most vulnerable, that are fleeing and looking for safety. If we want to be a global leader, we must also be responsibly global. A part of this problem, there's 110 million displaced people in the world right now. In 2014, that was 25 million. So in 10 years, we've gone from 25 million displaced to 110 million displaced people. And we need to be globally responsible. If we're a global leader, we also need to do our portion of being globally responsible to help to make sure that those who are vulnerable, we can either help them in their native country, if we can help with the issues going on, or help them in their journey and help to have an asylum system that does allow the most vulnerable to come. But what the Border Act would do is to make sure that that's the case. And I think I've heard earlier speakers speak about this, and I think there's some agreement. The asylum system needs to be maintained for those that are most vulnerable. However, today's conversation is about legal immigration. And by opening up the legal immigration channels would allow for those who might be looking for economic opportunity or other things as they come to the border or ports of entry, they would also be able to seek to enter the U.S. through legal pathways. So it was a great first step, and we would love to see additional solutions beyond that. Thank you, Madam Chair.
Thank you very much. And now moving on to Stein Setvik. Stein Setvik, please unmute and direct your question to me.
Madam Chair, how would the speaker address concerns that expanding legal immigration could lead to increased competition for jobs, particularly in low-skilled sectors? And what measures could be taken to ensure that both immigrants and native workers benefit?
Yeah, thank you. Oh, sorry. Go ahead, Madam Chair.
Please.
Okay. Sorry, I was waiting for the direct. Thank you for that question. Absolutely. So as we've laid out already, newcomers come and help to drive innovation. So, 7 ranches a day close in Texas alone, just because they don't have the workers that they need. 50 strawberry farms closed this last year in California alone, many of those multi-generation strawberry farms. And national security experts are telling us we're now exporting more food than we import, which has just reached a tipping point and gotten into a national security crisis because now we're dependent on other countries for our food, which is a huge problem. And so we know that, many of the industries that are in need of workers, 75% of the ag industry is made up of foreign-born workers, 45% of the healthcare industry. My parents are baby boomers in need of healthcare, home health, and surgeons, nurses. I desperately want to make sure we're continuing to bring the best and the brightest. And so the numbers just don't show that immigrants they come and replace workers. What we find, which a previous speaker said, is some are not participating in the economy, and that's not an immigration problem, that's an education problem. We have 8 to 10 million unfilled jobs. So we need more workers, and that's just the solution. We don't think that that's an unbridled number. We should just open the floodgates. I agree with previous speakers that we should be assessing our needs and supplying those in a way that's smart, won't overwhelm our system, and helps to meet our crucial needs.
Thank you very much. And now for the final question for this speaker, we go to October Zaho. Hope I'm saying that right. October, unmute and direct your question to me.
Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, how does the speaker distinguish the USA's responsibility to receive and accommodate immigrants compared to the responsibility of other nations?
Thank you for that question, Madam Chair. Well, I believe that we should be a top player just as we want to be as a top global player in all of the other ways. If we are a lead economy, if we are a lead partner with many allies around the world, we also should be a lead partner and economy helping to solve global issues. And so I think that we do have a large responsibility in meeting the need both externally and internally within our borders of the 110 million displaced folks. And we have always been a proud leader in particular in the refugee space. We help much more than a few of the countries next in the line together combined. And so we've always been that way, but the number is increasing at a rapid rate. And we certainly have involved relationships around the world. And so I definitely believe that we need to be, whether that's looking at push factors or hemispheric relationships, or cross-country relationships, we need to be looking at the drivers, helping to solve issues in the locale if possible. But also we need to know that our economy is always going to be an economic driver. We are always going to have folks want to come here and live their American dream, as my grandparents did, as I'm sure many folks on this call can point back to a family member throughout time who either fled or just wanted to contribute and live a better life. And we certainly shouldn't close our doors to being both globally responsible, but also globally competitive.
With that, our speaker and our questioners are thanked. Before we move on to our final panelist, I have a note. We have multiple people chatting to ask, why can't you see your video like in the usual community debates? This is run as a Zoom webinar since we have a panel. That's the reason. So you only get to see us on the panel. Without further ado, moving on to our final speaker, our second negative, Sohrab Ahmari. You have 5 minutes. The floor is yours.
Well, thank you, Madam Chairwoman, and thanks to Braver Angels for bringing us together to discuss this crucial question. And thank you all for being here, the members. I'll tell you 2 things about myself that are pertinent to this debate. The first is that I'm a legal immigrant to the United States and a proud American by choice. The second is that I believe that the national interest demands that we dramatically reduce immigration rates currently, legal and illegal. And you might ask why I take this position. It's really because years ago, I started reading far-right reactionary pundits and thinkers, people like Ann Coulter. In one of her books years ago, Coulter wrote, quote, "Many of the worst-off native-born Americans are hurt by immigration, especially immigration from Latin America, because these immigrants, quote, have much less education than the average US worker. They increase the supply of less skilled labor, driving down the wages of the worst paid Americans." Coulter also pointed that, quote, low-skilled immigrants threaten to unravel safety nets for the most vulnerable Americans, end quote. Oh, wait, I'm sorry. It wasn't Ann Coulter who penned these words. It was the progressive economist Paul Krugman, writing in the New York Times in 2006. All right, well, maybe I confused Coulter and Krugman, similar opening syllables. But I definitely remember the arch-reactionary Pat Buchanan saying, quote, "This country is suffering from immigrant indigestion. It is time to call a halt on this grand rush for American gold, which overfloods the labor market, resulting in lowering the standard of living. The excessive immigration is against the interests of the masses of all races and nationalities in this country." Man, Buchanan's rhetoric could really sizzle, right? Oh, wait, it was not Pat Buchanan who said these words. It was A. Philip Randolph, the African-American labor activist and civil rights leader who organized the 1963 March on Washington, at which Dr. Martin Luther King delivered his "I Have a Dream" speech. Okay, I'm sure I'll get this next one right. It was Steve Bannon, the Trump consigliere, who during his stint in the White House wrote a policy memo noting that, quote, "an effectively regulated immigration policy establishes limits on the number of immigrants. Moreover, these limits must be enforceable and strictly enforced." Bannon also insisted that, quote, "immigrants should be chosen on the basis of the skills they contribute to the US economy, and that no unskilled low-wage migrants should be admitted." Oops, I'm wrong on this last count too. No, it wasn't Bannon who penned those words. They come from a 1995 report of the US Commission on Immigration Reform, chaired at the time by Barbara Jordan. Jordan, of course, was a protege of President Lyndon B. Johnson. She was the first African-American woman elected to the Texas State Senate since Reconstruction, and the first ever Southern Black woman elected to the US House of Representatives. Notice a pattern. Today, progressives and pro-business libertarian lobbies frame opposition to mass migration as something that could only be motivated by reactionary racism. But until relatively recently, opposing the importation of low-wage migrants was the consensus position of the Democratic Party and much of the labor movement. Why? Because an earlier generation of progressives understood that low-wage migration is one of the chief ways by which employers play nations, populations, and jurisdictions against each other to lower wages. Progressives once understood that this kind of migration undercuts the wages of working-class people, strains the social services relied upon by the poor, and hinders productivity growth and thus our prosperity as a nation. In this country, going back to our founding, some employers have always preferred to have workers they can utterly dominate. And that's what you get by admitting millions of people who are completely vulnerable to their employers, who can't speak the language, and who lack the power to organize. That's why libertarians and the Koch brothers and the Wall Street Journal editorial page where I used to work have always supported open borders. It's why employer lobbies always call for this. What's curious about our time is that it's also become, in part, the progressive position. Although I should say the old Bernie Sanders would be an exception to this. Or maybe it isn't so strange. Fact is, low-wage migrant labor sustains the lifestyles of people in my social class, and maybe some of the people on this call as well. Upper middle class urban knowledge workers who like to pretend we can afford the lifestyles of the old gentry, with nannies and gardeners and house cleaners, servants on the cheap. And we can afford such a lifestyle by importing millions of vulnerable, hyper-exploitable workers into the homeland. The difference is that the old exploiters were open about what they wanted out of slave or near-slave labor, whereas today's gentry wraps its own advantage-seeking in the garb of humanitarianism and tolerance. So you can support the other side's position if you wish, but be honest about it. You're supporting mass exploitation. Or you can join Cesar Chavez, Barbara Jordan, Philip Randolph, and many other progressives and labor leaders of the past in opposing this motion. We must stop legal and illegal immigration insofar as it's used to advance corporate arbitrage and exploitation. And that's what we're getting with the current legal immigration regime, and expanding it would only make the problem worse. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our speaker. We will now go to our first questioner, Daniel Gallegos Banda. Please unmute and direct your question to me. Do we have Daniel?
Hello?
The floor is yours.
Can y'all hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay. Hi. Yes. Hi, Madam Chair. So what
I can't hear you.
We can't, well, to the questioner, we cannot hear you. Can you quickly try to adjust?
1 second. Hello? Hello?
Hello? Go for it. We can hear you.
Hi. Do you feel like immigration, either like as a whole, as a talking point itself, or particularly like undocumented immigrants, are often blamed or like used as a scapegoat for major social issues like the housing crisis, the low unemployment, low wages, like all kinds of things like that, of that sort that were mentioned earlier? That's my question. Thank you.
Is it Daniel?
Yes, sir.
Daniel, thank you for your question. I do think there can be, and has long been, a strain in this country of demonizing migrants, and it's deplorable. However, we have to be careful. There is a kind of rhetoric about migrants that's irrational and discriminatory and so on. But there are social net negative effects associated with mass migration, which are real and documented empirically, and we can go down. So some of them, you mentioned, for example, access to social services. And I apologize because I try to keep I have a debate notebook for these moments. So in 1997, the National Research Council did a very comprehensive study, one of the most comprehensive studies ever done on the impact of the fiscal impact of immigration. And it found that on a fiscal basis, there are, quote, significant net costs to taxpayers in states with large immigrant populations. These high fiscal impacts are due particularly to the sizable presence of lesser skilled immigrants whose tax payments over a lifetime are insufficient to cover the costs of the services that they use. In 2017, the National Academies of Science found that it ran 8 different scenarios involving immigrants under current policy favoring unskilled migrants, paying for public services at different levels. And in none of the 8 scenarios, the kind of empirical studies that they did, quote, did we break even on the cost of public services they use versus tax receipts for labor, from migrant labor. According to the latest survey of income and program participation of the U.S. Census Bureau, more than half of immigrant-headed households use at least one public welfare program, compared to 39% of native households. Now, it's true that immigrants do slightly better when we look at individual use versus household use. But household use is the more realistic measure because of a predictable pattern, because one member of the household can become a U.S. citizen, bringing access to the whole household. So the one that measures household use and shows that immigrants are much low-wage, especially low-wage migrants, are much more likely to take advantage of the welfare system is a more telling indicator. Or you mentioned wages. I mean,
Speaker, well, let's wrap it up quickly so we can get to the next question.
Okay, I thought there were some of the answers were about reasonably.
I'm trying to keep it roughly equal, but you can finish that thought.
So the Barbara Jordan Commission that I mentioned found that the non-college majority loses from immigration of unskilled labor. The principal effect of mass low-wage migration to the United States is to put pressure on the wages, especially of Americans who don't have a high school education or who only have a high school education. The National Research Council found the same thing. So in those instances, you absolutely have, real empirical, studied over long term by institutions that are not, anti-immigration per se. They're just doing objective studies. And that we have to keep apart from some of the sentiments that are sometimes expressed, which I agree are, blame immigrants in a way that's, unfair or discriminatory and so on. But the data we have to pay attention to beyond that kind of noise.
Thank you to the speaker and questioner. We will next go to Jason Ortiz. Jason, unmute and ask your question to me, please.
Sure. Thank you, Madam Chair. My question is, what laws and policies could be enacted to make legal immigration faster and easier? And at what levels of government could these policies be enacted? Thank you.
To our speaker.
Thank you, Jason. Well, the premise of mine and Jim's argument that is that we don't necessarily want, to expand immigration. So like to speed up the process isn't necessarily a desirable goal, at least under our premises. I think the main thing to do is to think about what types of immigration we want. And the Jordan Commission, again, created under a Democratic administration headed by a civil rights pioneer and a Democrat, argued that most forms of family reunification is not necessarily good for the economy. What we want is skills-based immigration, but even there we have to be careful because we don't want to incentivize employers to bring in cheaper labor rather than developing our domestic workforce. But still, if we are going to, for example, be a little bit more choosy in how we do it, I would end most forms of beyond maybe nuclear family reunification and focus more on a skills-based, point-based system like most other developed countries have. Even Canada is heavily skills-based in terms of how it chooses employees. And then, of course, we can create greater efficiency in that process so it moves faster. But first, we have to decide what kind of immigration we want. And that means reducing family-based, or what's called chain migration, or family preference kind of, because that brings in people who are often net welfare users compared to whether or not they contribute to the system, and they drive down the wages of native-born American workers.
Thank you to our speaker and questioner. And now for our final question, we will go to David Izquierdo. David, please unmute and direct your question to me.
Yes, I believe my question was on the sentiment towards reduced immigration, legal immigration. Is that based on the enormous amount of illegal immigration that we have?
Thank you for your question, Mr. Ortiz. So I think, like Jim, I believe we need to just have reduce overall immigration rates. But certainly the problem at the border, the kind of illegal immigration problem at the border, is in some ways is more urgent because the numbers are much larger there. And what you have there is basically, and it's a problem I've reported on for the Wall Street Journal in Europe. It's a problem, honestly, in somewhere like South Africa, which is the most developed country in Africa, and they have the same problem. And it's the fact that we have, as Jim said, we have an asylum system that is not meeting the needs of current economic reality. That is, most of the people who come to the southern border claiming asylum overwhelmingly are economic migrants. I know this from personal reporting in the sense I've embedded with them, and they're often very honest. They're like, I'm not persecuted. I'm here for a job. And that's honorable, and I understand that. But it makes a mockery of the asylum system because they're not really refugees properly so called. And of those figures, I mean, we have Department of Justice figures between 2008 and 2019. Only about half of so-called asylum seekers or would-be asylum seekers actually went through the process, and of those, the vast majority did not qualify. That is, when these people are processed as asylum seekers through our system, they are found not to be really asylum seekers properly so-called, but they're economic migrants. So that's a problem we need to combat as well But there's also, I think, just lowering legal immigration's rates. It has to be part of it if we're trying to protect our domestic workforce. And we'll get into it later, but it actually it has impacts on our productivity as well when you have too much low-wage mass migration.
With that, our final speaker and questioners are thanked. All right, everybody, that concludes the opening round of our debate. We are now going to take about a 2-minute stretch break. I have 8 minutes past the top of the hour. That's 3 p.m. here in the Eastern time zone. Come back at 10 past if you need to get up. But in the meantime, if I can have our member of our team launch the poll. There is a poll that we would love to hear your thoughts while you're taking a break. And in the meantime, to our panelists, we're going to have reverse order as a reminder. So Jennie, you are up next, 2-minute speech, then Sohrab, Gaby, and Jim. And if you wish to, I'm going to let our panelists know as you think about what you wish to say later, just some of the other really great questions that we got in that we didn't get a chance to ask. Some from people who'd already asked, and some from people I wish we could have called on everyone. Does the speaker think that it is realistic to return illegal immigrants to their country as the former president suggests? What is the speaker's feeling about sending back immigrants, especially those that have been here most of their lives? That was from Carol Van Bruggen. And again, these are not directed to any of you. They're just for us to think about. Any of you, if you wish to address them in your closing remarks. From Jason Ortiz. Is it true that American citizens are competing with immigrants for the same types of jobs? What types of jobs are overly competitive? From Michael and Cynthia O'Brien. Could the speaker elaborate on how increasing immigration will reduce inflation? From Lonnie Slonim, how would you resolve the dilemma of illegal immigrants contributing 100 billion that's exclamation point billion. I believe it said 100, I'm guessing, in taxes and some 25 billion in Social Security payments, none of which are they entitled to use. From Marielle Scherer Crosby, the speaker mentioned low-wage immigrant. What about higher skills immigration? So I'm sure that many of you have heard these sorts of questions before. There are still more, but I am going to move us onward now. Thank you to everyone who submitted questions. We have a very thoughtful audience. We are grateful to all of you for being here and sending them in. I remind you that if you'd like to continue this conversation, we will have community debates on the topic as well. So what have we got for our poll? Looks like there's a lot of interest in all of these topics, but the immigration and the economy was the winner, with 56% selecting that, to the extent there's a winner. And then I'm very happy to hear, as someone who dearly loves this program, that people are saying that they better understand other viewpoints, that they heard something tonight that they hadn't previously considered. Thank you very much for that feedback. We are grateful to all of you for being here. And thank you again to our panelists who have planted some new thoughts in people's minds. So, all right, we are a minute past. I hope everyone got a good break. And with that, the poll will close and we will move on to our first closing speech. Jennie, the floor is yours again. You have 2 minutes.
Thank you so much. Absolutely. So really quickly, something that's really interesting is we could go the route of like Japan. We could go the route of minimizing legal immigration, restricting it. But then one day we would be, as Japan is, working at the embassy, calling organizations in the US like ourselves, asking how do we undo the damage we've done now to our economy and to our country's competitiveness and our growth. Immigration is the foundation of our country. It makes us the strongest country in the world. We can both be secure and humane. We can be a nation of laws and of grace. We are here today because our immigration system desperately needs to be modernized. You heard report earlier from 1997. That was over 30 years ago, and we need much change. Much has changed. Nearly 80% of Americans across the political spectrum want Republicans and Democrats to work together on common sense solutions, not rhetoric. And so our organization stands in particular with leaders across faith, law enforcement, national security, and business to enact fair policies that strengthen our country and move us into the future. Thank you.
Thank you to our speaker. Our next closing statement comes from Sohrab Ahmari.
Thank you, Madam Chairwoman. Just a quick point of clarification. I did cite the 1997 Barbara Jordan report on the immigration's effects on welfare use and revenue. But I also cited more recent research from 2017 from the National Academies of Science, as well as from 2022, the latest survey of income and program participation of the U.S. Census. Look, we've heard a lot about how immigrants are vital to growth, and it's true. I mean, neither Jim and I are calling for a total shutdown of immigration. However, the question is what kind of growth, and whether or not just adding low-wage laborer upon low-wage laborer brings the kind of prosperity that we want. It's true, you can import 100 million illiterate peasants, and those people, just by giving them scythes to do like agricultural work, that would create what economists call output growth. But that's not what is the basis of prosperity. The basis of prosperity is productivity growth. And what low wages in general, and this is immigration is not the only source of this, but immigration is one chief way that big business lobbies have managed to drive down wages in this country, is by it hinders technological development. If you can always do the same things with cheaper and cheaper labor, like the South that had slavery, you're not going to be able to mechanize. Why did the North agriculturally mechanize much faster? It was because it had free labor, which meant it had to innovate, and they did that much faster. So when you hear about immigration and growth, keep in mind, we're talking about output growth, but not necessarily productivity growth, which is the real measure of a nation's prosperity. Thank you very much.
Thank you to our speaker. And now we will go to Gaby Pacheco for her closing statement.
Thank you. I just want to share that in my 20 years of doing this work, I have never met an immigrant who wants to live in the shadows, who wants to live in constant fear, be paid low minimum wages, or be denied the freedoms that this great nation affords all of us. I am a new citizen, proud new American. I became a citizen last year. And I want to tell you that immigrants or immigration are not the problem. Actually, we desperately need immigrants. For too long, we have allowed our political system to divide us and ignore the fact that our immigration system is outdated and broken. People throw Republican and Democrat and out there to justify their position. I am a proud independent. I will be voting this year, but this is not a Democrat or Republican issue. It's a lack of leadership in our country, period. Some suggest that the solution is to build a wall or not allow immigrants at all. A wall will cost us billions of dollars and fail to address the real issue. What we need is an immigration system that is smart and strategic, one that assesses our country's needs each year, that finds out how many nurses, teachers, construction workers do we need. Without these workers, we cannot build the homes we desperately need, or fund the programs like Social Security, or help the elderly with nurses and nursing assistants. Moreover, wages are not low because of immigrants. They are driven down by companies prioritizing shareholder profits. That's the truth. People often rely on outdated data and beliefs like those from the Jordan Commission, which do not reflect today's global reality. Google was built after that. The smartphone was built after that. We are in a different world that we were 30 years ago. Ultimately, we must maintain our moral clarity. Fighting for fair and just immigration systems is the right thing to do. Being anti-immigrant and scapegoating is un-American. This debate, though, is just one moment in time, but I am just so grateful that I'm part of it, because we do need to have a dialogue on this. And as long as we stand together and remain clear about what is truly right, I believe we'll create a system that reflects the best of who we are as a nation, both for our immigrant brothers and sisters, but also our country and every American. So I just want to say thank you to Braver Angels for tackling this issue today and for the next 2 years.
Thank you very much to our speaker. And now for our final closing statement, we go to Jim Robb.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you, Braver Angels, for arranging this fine debate. And it's a learning experience for all of us, I know. I think it's important when we talk about immigration to ask the most important question, which is, what is the purpose of immigration for the United States in the 21st century? I think we have to look at remaking the system from top to bottom, and to assess what the needs are of our country now. Yes, we need a certain amount of immigration just to keep our population level. We need to fill in certain occupations, et cetera. The current way we do immigration, which tends to bring in people of lower education, and with their numbers and they're being so desperate, driving down the cost of labor, is something that's happened over decades and is one of the main reasons that we have flat wages for people in the bottom half of the economy. And I think when we're talking about immigration, we can't ignore where Americans are and how desperate many Americans are in this time of high inflation. Housing is being priced outside of the ability for younger people to get, and it's causing a crisis. So immigration has to be nuanced. The level of it needs to be matching what we need now. I agree with the one speaker who said a system like Canada's would be more intelligent, in which needs are constantly adjusted and numbers set annually. That's a good idea. But what we need is to remember that Americans are struggling too, and we need to think, what are immigration policies that will help Americans who have no place to go? There's no place to immigrate for them. America is the end of the line. Thank you very much.
And with that, our speaker and all of our panelists are thanked. All right, everybody, that brings us to the conclusion of the debate part of our event. So I hereby declare this debate adjourned,